Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 289. Narrated by Qarib Mawla ibn Abbas, Abdullah bin Abbas said that he had passed a night in the house of Ma'imuna, the mother of the faithful believers, who was his aunt. He said, I slept across the bed, and Allah's apostle along with his wife slept lengthwise. Allah's apostle slept till midnight or slightly before or after it. Then Allah's apostle woke up, sat, and removed the traces of sleep by rubbing his hands over his face. Then he recited the last 10 verses of Surat Al-Imran, 2. Then he went towards a hanging leather water container and performed a perfect ablution and then stood up for prayer. Abdullah bin Abbas added, I got up and did the same as Allah's apostle had done and then went and stood by his side. Allah's apostle then put his right hand over my head and caught my right ear and twisted it. He offered 2 rakat, then 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 2 rakat and then offered 1 rakat witr. Then he lay down till the muaddin came and then he prayed 2 light rakat and went out and offered the early morning, Fajr, prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 290. Narrated by Abdullah, we used to greet the Prophet while he was praying and he used to answer our greetings. When we returned from Najashi, the ruler of Ethiopia, we greeted him, but he did not answer us, during the prayer, and, after finishing the prayer, he said, in the prayer one is occupied, with a more serious matter. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 291. Narrated by Abdullah, the same as number 290 from the Prophet. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 292. Narrated by Zayd bin Arqam, in the lifetime of the Prophet we used to speak while praying, and one of us would tell his needs to his companions, till the verse, guard strictly your prayers, 2.238, was revealed. After that we were ordered to remain silent while praying. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 293. Narrated by Sal bin Sa'd, the Prophet went out to effect a reconciliation between the tribes of Bani Amr bin Auf and the time of the prayer became due. Bilal went to Abu Bakr and said, the Prophet is detained. Will you lead the people in the prayer? Abu Bakr replied, yes, if you wish. So Bilal pronounced the Iqamah and Abu Bakr led the prayer. In the meantime the Prophet came crossing the rows of the praying people, till he stood in the first row and the people started clapping. Abu Bakr never looked hither and thither during the prayer, but when the people clapped too much, he looked back and saw the Prophet in the first row. The Prophet waved him to remain at his place, but Abu Bakr raised both his hands and sent praises to Allah and then retreated, and the Prophet went forward and led the prayer. See Hadith number 295 and 296. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 294. Narrated by Abdullah bin Mas'ud, we used to say the greeting, name, and greet each other in the prayer. Allah's apostle heard it and said, say, At-tahiyatu lillahi wa salawatu wa tayyibatu. Assalamu alayka ayyaha an nabiyyu wa rahmatu Allahi wa barakatuhu. Assalamu alayna wa ala ibadi Allahi as-salihin. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasulullah. All the compliments are for Allah and all the prayers and all the good things are for Allah. Peace be on you, O Prophet, and Allah's mercy and blessings are on you. And peace be on us and on the good, pious, worshippers of Allah. I testify that none has the right to be worshipped but Allah and that Muhammad is his slave and apostle. So, when you have said this, then you have surely sent the greetings to every good, pious, worshipper of Allah, whether he be in the heaven or on the earth. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 295. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, said, the saying Subhanallah is for men and clapping is for women. If something happens in the prayer, the men can invite the attention of the Imam by saying Subhanallah, and women, by clapping their hands. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 296. Narrated by Sal bin Sa'd, the Prophet said, the saying Subhanallah is for men and clapping is for women. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 297a. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, while Abu Bakr was leading the people in the morning prayer on a Monday, the Prophet came towards them suddenly, having lifted the curtain of Aisha's house, and looked at them as they were standing in rows and smiled. Abu Bakr tried to come back, thinking that Allah's apostle wanted to come out for the prayer. The attention of the Muslims was diverted from the prayer because they were delighted to see the Prophet. The Prophet waved his hand to them to complete their prayer, then he went back into the room and let down the curtain. The Prophet expired on that very day. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 297b. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's Apostle said, a woman called her son while he was in his hermitage and said, O Juray'i, he said, O Allah, my mother is calling me, and I am offering my prayer, what shall I do? She again said, O Juray'i. He said again, O Allah, my mother is calling me, and I am offering my prayer, what shall I do? She again said, O Juray'i. He again said, O Allah, my mother is calling me, and I am offering my prayer, what shall I do? She said, O Allah, do not let Juray'i die till he sees the faces of prostitutes. A shepherdess used to come by his hermitage for grazing her sheep, and she gave birth to a child. She was asked whose child that was, and she replied that it was from Juray'i and that he had come out from his hermitage. Juray'i said, where is that woman who claims that her child is from me? When she was brought to him along with the child, Juray'i asked the child, O Babus, who is your father? The child replied, the shepherd. See Hadith number 662. Vol 3. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 298. Narrated by Mu'aykib, the Prophet talked about a man leveling the earth on prostrating, and said, if you have to do so, then do it once. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 299. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, we used to pray with the Prophet in scorching heat, and if someone of us could not put his face on the earth, because of the heat, then he would spread his clothes and prostrate over them. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 300. Narrated by Aisha, I used to stretch my legs towards the Qibla of the Prophet while he was praying. Whenever he prostrated he touched me, and I would withdraw my legs, and whenever he stood up, I would stretch my legs. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 301. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet once offered the prayer and said, Satan came in front of me and tried to interrupt my prayer, but Allah gave me an upper hand on him and I choked him. No doubt, I thought of tying him to one of the pillars of the mosque till you get up in the morning and see him. Then I remembered the statement of Prophet Solomon, my Lord, bestow on me a kingdom such as shall not belong to any other after me. Then Allah made him, Satan, return with his head down, humiliated. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 302. Narrated by Al-Azraq bin Qais, we were at Al-Awaz fighting the Al-Haruriya tribe. While I was at the bank of a river, a man was praying and the reins of his animal were in his hands and the animal was struggling and he was following the animal. Shubi'a, a sub-narrator, said that man was Abu Barza al-Islam. A man from the Khawarij said, "O Allah, be harsh to this sheikh." And when the sheikh, Abu Barza, finished his prayer, he said, "I heard your remark. No doubt, I participated with Allah's apostle in 6 or 7 or 8 holy battles and saw his leniency, and no doubt, I would rather retain my animal than let it return to its stable, as it would cause me much trouble." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 303. Narrated by Aisha, once the sun eclipsed and Allah's apostle stood up for the prayer and recited a very long surah and when bowed for a long while and then raised his head and started reciting another surah. Then he bowed, and after finishing, he prostrated and did the same in the second rak'ah and then said, "These, lunar and solar eclipses, are 2 of the signs of Allah, and if you see them, pray till the eclipse is over." No doubt, while standing at this place I saw everything promised to me by Allah and I saw paradise, and I wanted to pluck a bunch of grapes therefrom, at the time when you saw me stepping forward. No doubt, I saw hell with its different parts destroying each other when you saw me retreating, and in it I saw Amr bin Luhay, who started the tradition of freeing animals, set them free, in the name of idols. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 304. Narrated by Ibn Umar, the Prophet saw some sputum on the wall facing the Qibla of the mosque and became furious with the people of the mosque and said, during the prayer, "Allah is in front of every one of you and so he should not spit," or said, "He should not expect orate." Then he got down and scratched the sputum with his hand. Ibn Umar said, after narrating, "If any one of you has to spit during the prayer, he should spit to his left." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 305. Narrated by Anas, the Prophet said, "Whenever any one of you is in prayer, he is speaking in private to his Lord, and so he should neither spit in front of him nor on his right side but to his left side under his left foot." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 306. Narrated by Sal bin Sa'd, the people used to offer the prayer with the Prophet with their waist sheets tied round their necks because of the shortness of the sheets, and the women were ordered not to lift their heads till the men had sat straight. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 307. Narrated by Abdullah, I used to greet the Prophet while he was in prayer and he would return my greeting, but when we returned from Ethiopia, I greeted the Prophet while he was praying, but he did not return the greeting, and, after finishing the prayer, he said, "In the prayer one is occupied with a more serious matter." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 308. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, Allah's apostle sent me for some job, and when I had finished it I returned and came to the Prophet and greeted him, but he did not return my greeting. So I felt so sorry that only Allah knows it, and I said to myself, perhaps Allah's apostle is angry because I did not come quickly. Then again I greeted him, but he did not reply. I felt even more sorry than I did the first time. Again I greeted him and he returned the greeting and said, "The thing which prevented me from returning the greeting was that I was praying." And at that time he was on his rahila and his face was not towards the Qibla. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 309. Narrated by Sal bin Sa'd, the news about the differences amongst the people of Bani Amr bin Auf at Quba reached Allah's apostle, and so he went to them along with some of his companions to effect a reconciliation. Allah's apostle was delayed there and the time for the prayer became due. Bilal came to Abu Bakr and said, O Abu Bakr, Allah's apostle is detained there, and the time for the prayer is due. Will you lead the people in prayer? Abu Bakr replied, Yes, if you wish. So Bilal pronounced the Iqamah and Abu Bakr went forward and the people said Takbir. In the meantime, Allah's apostle came piercing through the rows till he stood in the first row and the people started clapping. Abu Bakr would never look hither and thither during the prayer, but when the people clapped much he looked back and saw Allah's apostle. The Prophet beckoned him to carry on. Abu Bakr raised both his hands, praised Allah, and retreated till he stood in the row, and Allah's apostle went forward and led the people in the prayer. When he had finished the prayer, he addressed the people and said, O people! Why did you start clapping when something happened to you in the prayer? Clapping is for women. Whenever one is confronted with something unusual in the prayer, one should say, Subhanallah. Then the Prophet looked towards Abu Bakr and asked, What prevented you from leading the prayer? When I beckoned you to carry on. Abu Bakr replied, It does not befit the son of Al-Qahafa to lead the prayer in the presence of Allah's apostle. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 310. Narrated by Abu Huraira, it was forbidden to keep the hands on the hips during the prayer. This is narrated by Abu Huraira from the Prophet. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 311. Narrated by Abu Huraira, it was forbidden to pray with the hands over one's hips. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 312. Narrated by Uqba bin al-Harith, I offered the Asr prayer with the Prophet, and after finishing the prayer with Taslim he got up quickly and went to some of his wives and then came out. He noticed the signs of astonishment on the faces of the people caused by his speed. He then said, I remembered while I was in my prayer that a piece of gold was lying in my house and I disliked that it should remain with us throughout the night, and so I have ordered it to be distributed. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 313. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's apostle said, When the adhan for the prayer is pronounced, then Satan takes to his heels passing wind so that he may not hear the adhan, and when the muaddin finishes, he comes back, and when the iqamah is pronounced he again takes to his heels, and when it is finished, he again comes back and continues reminding the praying person of things that he used not to remember when not in prayer till he forgets how much he has prayed. Abu Salama bin Abdurrahman said, If any one of you has such a thing, forgetting the number of rakat he has prayed, he should perform 2 prostrations of sahu, i.e. forgetfulness, while sitting. Abu Salama narrates this from Abu Huraira. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 314. Narrated by Abu Huraira, people say that I narrate too many narrations of the Prophet. Once I met a man, during the lifetime of the Prophet, and asked him, Which surah did Allah's apostle recite yesterday in the Isha prayer? He said, I do not know. I said, Did you not attend the prayer? He said, Yes, I did. I said, I know. He recited such and such surah. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 315. Narrated by Abdullah bin Bu'aynah, Allah's apostle once led us in a prayer and offered 2 rakat and got up, for the 3rd rakah, without sitting, after the 2nd rakah. The people also got up with him, and when he was about to finish his prayer, we waited for him to finish the prayer with taslim, but he said takbir before taslim and performed 2 prostrations while sitting and then finished the prayer with taslim. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 316. Narrated by Abdullah bin Bu'aynah, Allah's apostle got up after the second rak'ah of the Zuhr prayer without sitting in between the second and the third rak'ah. When he finished the prayer he performed 2 prostrations of sahu, and then finished the prayer with taslim. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 317. Narrated by Abdullah, once Allah's apostle offered 5 rak'at in the Zuhr prayer, and somebody asked him whether there was some increase in the prayer. Allah's apostle said, "What is that?" He said, "You have offered 5 rak'at." So Allah's apostle performed 2 prostrations of sahu after taslim. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 318. Narrated by Abu Hurairah, the Prophet led us in the Asr or the Zuhr prayer and finished it with taslim. Dulyadin said to him, "O Allah's apostle, has the prayer been reduced?" The Prophet asked his companions in the affirmative. So Allah's apostle I offered 2 more rak'at and then performed 2 prostrations of sahu. Sad said, I saw that Ursa bin Az Zubair had offered 2 rak'at in the Maghrib prayer and finished it with taslim. He then talked, and when he was informed about it, he completed the rest of his prayer and performed 2 prostrations, and said, "The Prophet prayed like this." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 319. Narrated by Abu Hurairah, once Allah's apostle offered 2 rak'at and finished his prayer. So Dulyadin asked him, "Has the prayer been reduced or have you forgotten?" Allah's apostle said, "Has Dulyadin spoken the truth?" The people replied in the affirmative. Then Allah's apostle stood up and offered the remaining 2 rak'at and performed taslim, and then said takbir and performed 2 prostrations like his usual prostrations, or a bit longer, and then got up. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 320. Narrated by Salama bin Alqama, I asked Muhammad bin Sirin whether tashahhud should be recited after the 2 prostrations of sahu. He replied, "It is not mentioned in Abu Hurairah's narration." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 321. Narrated by Abu Hurairah, the Prophet offered one of the evening prayers. The sub-narrator Muhammad said, "I think that it was most probably the Asr prayer, and he finished it after offering 2 rak'at only. He then stood near a piece of wood in front of the mosque and put his hand over it. Abu Bakr and Umar were amongst those who were present, but they dared not talk to him about that, because of excessive respect for him, and those who were in a hurry went out. They said, 'Has the prayer been reduced?' A man who was called Dulyadin by the Prophet said, to the Prophet, 'Has the prayer been reduced or have you forgotten?' He said, 'Neither have I forgotten, nor has the prayer been reduced.' He said, 'Certainly you have forgotten.' So the Prophet offered 2 more rak'at and performed tashm and then said takbir and performed a prostration of sahu like his ordinary prostration or a bit longer and then raised his head and said takbir and then put his head down and performed a prostration like his ordinary prostration or a bit longer, and then raised his head and said takbir." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 322. Narrated by Abdullah bin Bu'ayna al-Asti, the ally of Bani Abdul Muttalib, Allah's apostle stood up for the Zuhr prayer and he should have sat after the second rak'ah, but he stood up for the third rak'ah without sitting for tashahhud, and when he finished the prayer he performed 2 prostrations and said takbir on each prostration while sitting, before ending the prayer with taslim, and the people too performed the 2 prostrations with him instead of the sitting he forgot. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 323. Narrated by Abu Hurairah, Allah's apostle said, "When the call for prayer is made, Satan takes to his heels passing wind so that he may not hear the adhan, and when the call is finished he comes back, and when the iqama is pronounced, Satan again takes to his heels, and when the iqama is finished he comes back again and tries to interfere with the person and his thoughts and say, remember this and that, which he has not thought of before the prayer, till the praying person forgets how much he has prayed. If any one of you does not remember whether he has offered 3 or 4 rakat, then he should perform 2 prostrations of sahu while sitting. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 324. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's Apostle said, when any one of you stands for the prayers, Satan comes and puts him in doubts till he forgets how many rakat he has prayed. So if this happens to any one of you, he should perform 2 prostrations of sahu while sitting. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 325. Narrated by Quraib, I was sent to Aisha by Ibn Abbas, Al-Miswar bin Makrama and Abdurrahman bin Ezber. They told me to greet her on their behalf and to ask her about the offering of the 2 rakat after the Asr prayer and to say to her, we were informed that you offer those 2 rakat and we were told that the Prophet had forbidden offering them. Ibn Abbas said, I along with Umar bin al-Khattab used to beat the people whenever they offered them. I went to Aisha and told her that message. Aisha said, go and ask Salama about them. So I returned and informed them about her statement. They then told me to go to Salama with the same question with which T sent me to Aisha. Salama replied, I heard the Prophet forbidding them. Later I saw him offering them immediately after he prayed the Asr prayer. He then entered my house at a time when some of the Ansari women from the tribe of Bani Haram were sitting with me, so I sent my slave girl to him, having said to her, stand beside him and tell him that Salama says to you, O Allah's Apostle, I have heard you forbidding the offering of these 2 rakat after the Asr prayer, but I have seen you offering them. If he waves his hand, then wait for him. The slave girl did that. The Prophet beckoned her with his hand and she waited for him. When he had finished the prayer he said, O daughter of Bani Umayyah, you have asked me about the 2 rakat after the Asr prayer. The people of the tribe of Abdul Qais came to me and made me busy and I could not offer the 2 rakat after the Zuhr prayer. These 2 rakat that I have just prayed, are for those missed ones. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 326. Narrated by Sal bin Sa'd as Sa'idiyah, the news about the differences amongst the people of Bani Amr bin Auf reached Allah's Apostle, and so he went to them along with some of his companions to effect a reconciliation between them. Allah's Apostle was delayed there, and the time of the prayer was due. Bilal went to Abu Bakr and said to him, Allah's Apostle has been delayed there, and the time of prayer is due. So will you lead the people in prayer? Abu Bakr said, yes, if you wish. Bilal pronounced the iqama and Abu Bakr went forward and said takbir for the people. In the meantime Allah's Apostle came crossing the rows of the praying people, and stood in the first row, and the people started clapping. Abu Bakr would never glance sideways in his prayer, but when the people clapped much he looked back and saw Allah's Apostle. Allah's Apostle beckoned him to carry on the prayer. Abu Bakr raised his hands and thanked Allah, and retreated till he reached the first row. Allah's Apostle went forward and led the people in the prayer. When he completed the prayer he faced the people and said, O people! Why did you start clapping when something unusual happened to you in the prayer? Clapping is only for women. So whoever amongst you comes across something in the prayer should say, Subhanallah, for there is none who will not turn round on hearing him saying Subhanallah. O Abu Bakr! What prevented you from leading the people in the prayer when I beckoned you to do so? Abu Bakr replied, How dare the son of Abu Quhafa lead the prayer in the presence of Allah's apostle? Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 327. Narrated by Asma, I went to Aisha and she was standing praying and the people, too, were standing, praying. So I said, what is the matter with the people? She beckoned with her head towards the sky. I said, is there a sign? She nodded intending to say, yes. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 22, Hadith number 328. Narrated by Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, Allah's apostle during his illness prayed in his house sitting, whereas some people followed him standing, but the Prophet beckoned them to sit down. On completion of the prayer he said, the Imam is to be followed. So, bow when he bows, and raise your head when he raises his head. See Hadith number 657 Vol 1 for taking the verdict. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 329. Narrated by Abu Dhar, Allah's apostle said, someone came to me from my Lord and gave me the news, or good tidings, that if any of my followers dies worshipping none, in any way, along with Allah, he will enter paradise. I asked, even if he committed illegal sexual intercourse, adultery, and theft? He replied, even if he committed illegal sexual intercourse, adultery, and theft. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 330. Narrated by Abdullah, Allah's apostle said, anyone who dies worshipping others along with Allah will definitely enter the fire. I said, anyone who dies worshipping none along with Allah will definitely enter paradise. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 331. Narrated by Al-Bara bin Azib, Allah's apostle ordered us to do 7 things and forbade us to do other 7. He ordered us, to follow the funeral procession, to visit the sick, to accept invitations, to help the oppressed, to fulfill the oaths, to return the greeting and to reply to the sneezer, saying, may Allah be merciful on you, provided the sneezer says, all the praises are for Allah. He forbade us to use silver utensils and dishes and to wear golden rings, silk, clothes, dibagh, pure silk cloth, kissi, and istabrak, 2 kinds of silk cloths. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 332. Narrated by Abu Huraira, I heard Allah's apostle saying, the rights of a Muslim on the Muslims are to follow the funeral processions, to accept invitation and to reply the sneezer. See Hadith number 331. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 333. Narrated by Aisha, Abu Bakr came riding his horse from his dwelling place in As-Sun. He got down from it, entered the mosque and did not speak with anybody till he came to me and went direct to the Prophet, who was covered with a marked blanket. Abu Bakr uncovered his face. He knelt down and kissed him and then started weeping and said, my father and my mother be sacrificed for you, O Allah's Prophet. Allah will not combine 2 deaths on you. You have died the death which was written for you. Narrated Abu Salama from Ibn Abbas, Abu Bakr came out and Umar was addressing the people, and Abu Bakr told him to sit down but Umar refused. Abu Bakr again told him to sit down but Umar again refused. Then Abu Bakr recited the Tashahhud, i.e. none has the right to be worshipped but Allah and Muhammad is Allah's apostle, and the people attended to Abu Bakr and left Umar. Abu Bakr said, Amma ba'du, whoever amongst you worshipped Muhammad, then Muhammad is dead, but whoever worshipped Allah, Allah is alive and will never die. Allah said, Muhammad is no more than an apostle and indeed, many apostles have passed away before him. Up to the grateful. 3.144, the narrator added, by Allah, it was as if the people never knew that Allah had revealed this verse before till Abu Bakr recited it, and then whoever heard it, started reciting it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 334. Narrated by Kharija bin Zayd bin Thabit, al-Allah, an Ansari woman who gave the pledge of allegiance to the Prophet, said to me, the emigrants were distributed amongst us by drawing lots, and we got in our share Uthman bin Maz'un. We made him stay with us in our house. Then he suffered from a disease which proved fatal when he died, and was given a bath and was shrouded in his clothes. Allah's apostle came. I said, may Allah be merciful to you, O Abu as Saib. I testify that Allah has honored you. The Prophet said, how do you know that Allah has honored him? I replied, O Allah's apostle, let my father be sacrificed for you. On whom else shall Allah bestow his honor? The Prophet said, no doubt, death came to him. By Allah, I too wish him good, but by Allah, I do not know what Allah will do with me, though I am Allah's apostle. By Allah, I never attested the piety of anyone after that. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 335. Narrated by Al-Layth, as above. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 336. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, when my father was martyred, I lifted the sheet from his face and wept, and the people forbade me to do so, but the Prophet did not forbid me. Then my aunt Fatima began weeping, and the Prophet said, it is all the same whether you weep or not. The angels were shading him continuously with their wings till you shifted him from the field. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 337. Narrated by Abu Hurairah, Allah's apostle informed the people about the death of a Najashi on the very day he died. He went towards the musalla, praying place, and the people stood behind him in rows. He said 4 takburs, i.e. offered the funeral prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 338. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, the Prophet said, Zayd took over the flag and was martyred. Then it was taken by Ja'far, who was martyred as well. Then Abdullah bin Rawaha took the flag, but he too was martyred, and at that time the eyes of Allah's apostle were full of tears. Then Khalid bin al-Walid took the flag without being nominated as a chief beforehand, and was blessed with victory. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 339. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, a person died and Allah's apostle used to visit him. He died at night and the people buried him at night. In the morning they informed the Prophet about his death. He said, what prevented you from informing me? They replied, it was night, and it was a dark night, and so we disliked to trouble you. The Prophet went to his grave and offered the funeral prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 340. Narrated by Anas, the Prophet said, a Muslim whose 3 children die before the age of puberty will be granted paradise by Allah due to his mercy for them. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 341. Narrated by Abu Sa'id, the women requested the Prophet, please fix a day for us. So the Prophet preached to them and said, a woman whose 3 children died would be screened from the hell fire by them. Hearing that, a woman asked, if 2 died? The Prophet replied, even 2 would screen her from the hell fire. And Abu Hurairah added, those children should be below the age of puberty. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 342. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, "No Muslim whose 3 children died will go to the fire except for Allah's oath, i.e. everyone has to pass over the bridge above the lake of fire." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 343. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, the Prophet passed by a woman who was sitting and weeping beside a grave and said to her, "Fear Allah and be patient." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 344. Narrated by Atiyya al-Ansariya, Allah's apostle came to us when his daughter died and said, "Wash her thrice or 5 times or more, if you see it necessary, with water and sidra, and then apply camphor or some camphor at the end, and when you finish, notify me." So when we finished it, we informed him and he gave us his waist sheet and told us to shroud the dead body in it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 345. Narrated by Atiyya, Allah's apostle came to us and we were giving a bath to his dead daughter and said, "Wash her 3, 5 or more times with water and sidra and sprinkle camphor on her at the end, and when you finish, notify me." So when we finished, we informed him and he gave us his waist sheet and told us to shroud her in it. Ayyub said that Hafsa narrated to him a narration similar to that of Muhammad, in which it was said that the bath was to be given for an odd number of times, and the numbers 3, 5 or 7 were mentioned. It was also said that they were to start with the right side and with the parts which were washed in ablution, and that Atiyya also mentioned, "We combed her hair and divided them in 3 braids." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 346. Narrated by Atiyya, Allah's apostle, concerning his dead daughter's bath, said, "Start with the right side, and the parts which are washed in ablution." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 347. Narrated by Atiyya, when we washed the deceased daughter of the Prophet, he said to us, while we were washing her, "Start the bath from the right side and from the parts which are washed in ablution." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 348. Narrated by Atiyya, the daughter of the Prophet expired, and he said to us, "Wash her 3 or 5 times, or more if you see it necessary, and when you finish, notify me." So, when we finished, we informed him and he unfastened his waist sheet and told us to shroud her in it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 349. Narrated by Muhammad, Atiyya said, "One of the daughters of the Prophet died and he came out and said, 'Wash her 3 or 5 times or more, if you think it necessary, with water and sidra, and last of all put camphor, or some camphor, and when you finish, inform me.'" Atiyya added, "When we finished we informed him and he gave us his waist sheet and said, 'Shroud her in it.'" And Atiyya, in another narration, added, "The Prophet said, 'Wash her 3, 5 or 7 times or more, if you think it necessary.'" Hafsa said that Atiyya had also said, "We entwined her hair into 3 braids." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 350. Narrated by Hafsa bin Sirin, Atiyya said that they had entwined the hair of the daughter of Allah's apostle in 3 braids. They first undid her hair, washed and then entwined it in 3 braids. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 351. Narrated by Ibn Sirin, Atiyya, an Ansari woman who gave the pledge of allegiance to the Prophet, came to Basra to visit her son, but she could not find him. She narrated to us, "The Prophet came to us while we were giving bath to his dead daughter. He said, wash her 3 times, 5 times, or more, if you think it necessary, with water and sidr, and last of all put camphor, and when you finish, notify me. Umayyah added, after finishing, we informed him and he gave us his waist sheet and told us to shroud her in it and did not say more than that. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 352. Narrated by Umayyah, we entwined the hair of the dead daughter of the Prophet into 3 braids. Waqi said that Sufyan said, 1 braid was entwined in front and the other 2 were entwined on the sides of the head. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 353. Narrated by Umayyah, one of the daughters of the Prophet expired and he came to us and said, wash her with sidr, water, 4 odd number of times, i.e. 3, 5 or more, if you think it necessary, and in the last, put camphor or some camphor on her, and when you finish, notify me. So when we finished we informed him. He gave his waist sheet to us, to shroud her. We entwined the hair, of the deceased girl, in 3 braids and made them fall at her back. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 354. Narrated by Aisha, Allah's Apostle was shrouded in 3 Yemenite white suhiliya, pieces of cloth, of cotton, and in them there was neither a shirt nor a turban. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 355. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, while a man was riding his mount in Arafat, he fell down from it, his mount, and broke his neck, and died. The Prophet said, wash him with water and sidr and shroud him in 2 pieces of cloth, and neither perfume him, nor cover his head, for he will be resurrected on the day of resurrection saying, Labbaik, i.e. like a pilgrim. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 356. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, while a man was at Arafat, for Hajj, with Allah's Apostle the fell down from his mount and broke his neck, and died. So Allah's Apostle said, wash him with water and sidr and shroud him in 2 pieces of cloth and neither perfume him nor cover his head, for Allah will resurrect him on the day of resurrection and he will be saying Labbaik. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 357. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, a man was killed by his camel while we were with the Prophet and he was a muhrim. So the Prophet said, wash him with water and sidr and shroud him in 2 pieces of cloth and neither perfume him nor cover his head, for Allah will resurrect him on the day of resurrection and he will be saying Labbaik. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 358. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, a man fell from his mount and died while he was with the Prophet at Arafat. The Prophet said, wash him with water and sidr and shroud him in 2 pieces of cloth and neither perfume him nor cover his head, for he will be resurrected on the day of resurrection saying, Labbaik. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 359. Narrated by Ibn Umar, when Abdullah bin Ubay, the chief of hypocrites, died, his son came to the Prophet and said, O Allah's Apostle, please give me your shirt to shroud him in it, offer his funeral prayer and ask for Allah's forgiveness for him. So Allah's Apostle, P.B.U.H, gave his shirt to him and said, inform me, when the funeral is ready, so that I may offer the funeral prayer. So, he informed him and when the Prophet intended to offer the funeral prayer, Umar took hold of his hand and said, has Allah not forbidden you to offer the funeral prayer for the hypocrites? The Prophet said, I have been given the choice for Allah says, it does not avail, whether you, O Muhammad, ask forgiveness for them, hypocrites, or do not ask for forgiveness for them. Even though you ask for their forgiveness 70 times, Allah will not forgive them. 9.80 So the Prophet offered the funeral prayer, and on that the revelation came, and never, O Muhammad, pray, funeral prayer, for any of them, i.e. hypocrites, that dies. 984 Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 360. Narrated by Jabir, the Prophet came to the grave of Abdullah bin Ubay after his body was buried. The body was brought out, and then the Prophet put his saliva over the body and clothed it in his shirt. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 361. Narrated by Aisha, the Prophet was shrouded in 3 pieces of cloth which were made of suhul, a type of cotton, and neither a shirt nor a turban were used. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 362. Narrated by Aisha, Allah's Apostle was shrouded in 3 pieces of cloth and neither a shirt nor a turban were used. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 363. Narrated by Aisha, Allah's Apostle was shrouded in 3 pieces of cloth which were made of white suhul and neither a shirt nor a turban were used. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 364. Narrated by Sa'd from his father, once the meal of Abdurrahman bin Auf was brought in front of him, and he said, Mustab bin Umar was martyred and he was better than I, and he had nothing except his bird, a black square narrow dress, to be shrouded in. Hamza or another person was martyred and he was also better than I, and he had nothing to be shrouded in except his bird. No doubt, I fear that the rewards of my deeds might have been given early in this world. Then he started weeping. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 365. Narrated by Ibrahim, once a meal was brought to Abdurrahman bin Auf and he was fasting. He said, Mustab bin Umar was martyred and he was better than I and was shrouded in his bird, and when his head was covered with it, his legs became bare, and when his legs were covered his head got uncovered. Hamza was martyred and was better than I. Now the worldly wealth have been bestowed upon us, or said a similar thing. No doubt, I fear that the rewards of my deeds might have been given earlier in this world. Then he started weeping and left his food. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 366. Narrated by Kebab, we emigrated with the Prophet, p.b.u.h, in Allah's cause, and so our reward was then surely incumbent on Allah. Some of us died and they did not take anything from their rewards in this world, and amongst them was Mustab bin Umar, and the others were those who got their rewards. Mustab bin Umar was martyred on the day of the Battle of Uhud, and we could get nothing except his bird to shroud him in. And when we covered his head his feet became bare and vice versa. So the Prophet ordered us to cover his head only and to put ангիր, a kind of shrub, over his feet. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 367. Narrated by Sahl, a woman brought a woven burda, sheet, having edging, border, to the Prophet. Then Sahl asked them whether they knew what is burda. They said that burda is a cloak, and Sahl confirmed their reply. Then the woman said, I have woven it with my own hands and I have brought it so that you may wear it. The Prophet accepted it, and at that time he was in need of it. So he came out wearing it as his waist sheet. A man praised it and said, Will you give it to me? How nice it is. The other people said, You have not done the right thing, as the Prophet is in need of it and you have asked for it when you know that he never turns down anybody's request. The man replied, By Allah, I have not asked for it to wear it but to make it my shroud. Later it was his shroud. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 368. Narrated by Atiyya, we were forbidden to accompany funeral processions but not strictly. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 369. Narrated by Muhammad bin Sirin, one of the sons of Atiyya died, and when it was the third day she asked for a yellow perfume and put it over her body, and said, "We were forbidden to mourn for more than 3 days except for our husbands." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 370. Narrated by Zainab bint Abi Salama, when the news of the death of Abu Sufyan reached from Sham, Habiba on the third day, asked for a yellow perfume and scented her cheeks and forearms and said, "No doubt, I would not have been in need of this, had I not heard the Prophet saying, it is not legal for a woman who believes in Allah and the last day to mourn for more than 3 days for any dead person except her husband, for whom she should mourn for 4 months and 10 days. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 371. Narrated by Zainab bint Abi Salama, I went to Habiba, the wife of Prophet, who said, I heard the Prophet saying, it is not legal for a woman who believes in Allah and the last day to mourn for any dead person for more than 3 days except for her husband, for whom she should mourn, for 4 months and 10 days. Later I went to Zainab bint Yashir when her brother died, she asked for some scent, and after using it she said, I am not in need of scent, but I heard Allah's apostle saying, it is not legal for a woman who believes in Allah and the last day to mourn for more than 3 days for any dead person except her husband, for whom she should mourn, for 4 months and 10 days. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 372. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, the Prophet passed by a woman who was weeping beside a grave. He told her to fear Allah and be patient. She said to him, Go away, for you have not been afflicted with a calamity like mine. And she did not recognize him. Then she was informed that he was the Prophet. So she went to the house of the Prophet, and there she did not find any guard. Then she said to him, I did not recognize you. He said, Verily, the patience is at the first stroke of a calamity. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 373. Narrated by Usama bin Zayd, the daughter of the Prophet, P.B.U.H., sent a messenger to the Prophet requesting him to come as her child was dying, or was gasping, but the Prophet returned the messenger and told him to convey his greeting to her and say, Whatever Allah takes is for him, and whatever he gives is for him, and everything with him has a limited fixed term in this world, and so she should be patient and hope for Allah's reward. She again sent for him, swearing that he should come. The Prophet got up, and so did Sa'd bin Ubaidah, Mu'ad bin Jabal, Ubay bin Ka'b, Zayd bin Thabit and some other men. The child was brought to Allah's apostle while his breath was disturbed in his chest. The sub-narrator thinks that Usama added as if it was a leather water skin. On that the eyes of the Prophet, P.B.U.H., started shedding tears. Sa'd said, O Allah's apostle, what is this? He replied, It is mercy which Allah has lodged in the hearts of his slaves, and Allah is merciful only to those of his slaves who are merciful to others. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 374. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, we were in the funeral procession of one of the daughters of the Prophet, and he was sitting by the side of the grave. I saw his eyes shedding tears. He said, Is there anyone among you who did not have sexual relations with his wife last night? Abu Talha replied in the affirmative. And so the Prophet told him to get down in the grave. and so he got down in her grave. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 375. Narrated by Abdullah bin Ubaydullah bin Abi Malaika, one of the daughters of Uthman died at Mecca. We went to attend her funeral procession. Ibn Umar and Ibn Abbas were also present. I sat in between them, or said, I sat beside one of them. Then a man came and sat beside me. Abdullah bin Umar said to Amr bin Uthman, will you not prohibit crying, as Allah's apostle has said, the dead person is tortured by the crying of his relatives. Ibn Abbas said, Umar used to say so. Then he added, narrating, I accompanied Umar on a journey from Mecca till we reached Al-Baida. There he saw some travelers in the shade of a samara, a kind of forest tree. He said, to me, go and see who those travelers are. So I went and saw that one of them was Suhaib. I told this to Umar, who then asked me to call him. So I went back to Suhaib and said to him, depart and follow the chief of the faithful believers. Later, when Umar was stabbed, Suhaib came in weeping and saying, O my brother, O my friend. On this Umar said to him, O Suhaib, are you weeping for me? While the Prophet said, the dead person is punished by some of the weeping of his relatives. Ibn Abbas added, when Umar died I told all this to Aisha, and she said, may Allah be merciful to Umar. By Allah, Allah's apostle did not say that a believer is punished by the weeping of his relatives. But he said, Allah increases the punishment of a non-believer because of the weeping of his relatives. Aisha further added, the Quran is sufficient for you, to clear up this point, as Allah has stated, no burdened soul will bear another's burden. 35.18, Ibn Abbas then said, only Allah makes one laugh or cry. Ibn Umar did not say anything after that. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 376. Narrated by Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, once Allah's apostle passed by the grave of a Jewess whose relatives were weeping over her. He said, they are weeping over her and she is being tortured in her grave. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 377. Narrated by Abu Burda, that his father said, when Umar was stabbed, Suhaib started crying, O my brother. Umar said, don't you know that the Prophet said, the deceased is tortured for the weeping of the living? Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 378. Narrated by Al-Mughira, I heard the Prophet saying, ascribing false things to me is not like ascribing false things to anyone else. Whosoever tells a lie against me intentionally, then surely let him occupy his seat in hellfire. I heard the Prophet saying, the deceased who is wailed over is tortured for that wailing. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 379. Narrated by Ibn Umar from his father, the Prophet said, the deceased is tortured in his grave for the wailing done over him. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 380. Narrated by Shubi'a, the deceased is tortured for the wailing of the living ones over him. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 381. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, on the day of the Battle of Uhud, my father was brought and he had been maimed and was placed in front of Allah's apostle and a sheet was over him. I went intending to uncover my father, but my people forbade me. Again I wanted to uncover him, but my people forbade me. Allah's apostle gave his order and he was shifted away. At that time he heard the voice of a crying woman and asked, who is this? They said, it is the daughter or the sister of Amr. He said, why does she weep? or let her stop weeping, for the angels had been shading him with their wings till he, i.e. the body of the martyr, was shifted away. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 382. Narrated by Abdullah, the Prophet said, "He who slaps his cheeks, tears his clothes and follows the ways and traditions of the days of ignorance is not one of us." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 383. Narrated by Amir bin Sa'd bin Abi Waqtas, that his father said, "In the year of the last Hajj of the Prophet I became seriously ill and the Prophet used to visit me inquiring about my health. I told him, I am reduced to this state because of illness and I am wealthy and have no inheritors except a daughter." In this narration the name of Amir bin Sa'd is mentioned and in fact it is a mistake. The narrator is Aisha bin Sa'd bin Abi Waqtas. "Should I give 2/3 of my property in charity?" He said, "No." I asked, "Half?" He said, "No." Then he added, 1/3, and even 1/3 is much. You'd better leave your inheritors wealthy rather than leaving them poor, begging others. You will get a reward for whatever you spend for Allah's sake, even for what you put in your wife's mouth." I said, "O Allah's Apostle, will I be left alone after my companions have gone?" He said, "If you are left behind, whatever good deeds you will do will upgrade you and raise you high. And perhaps you will have a long life so that some people will be benefited by you while others will be harmed by you. O Allah, complete the emigration of my companions and do not turn them renegades." But Allah's Apostle felt sorry for poor Sa'd bin Khawla as he died in Mecca. But Sa'd bin Abi Waqtas lived long after the Prophet, p.b.u.h. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 384. Narrated by Abdullah, the Prophet said, "He who slaps the cheeks, tears the clothes and follows the tradition of the days of ignorance is not from us." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 385. Narrated by Abdullah, the Prophet said, "He who slaps the cheeks, tears the clothes and follows the traditions of the days of ignorance is not from us." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 386. Narrated by Aisha, when the Prophet got the news of the death of Ibn Haritha, Ja'far, and Ibn Rawaha, he sat down and looked sad, and I was looking at him through the chink of the door. A man came and told him about the crying of the women of Ja'far. The Prophet ordered him to forbid them. The man went and came back saying that he had told them, but they did not listen to him. The Prophet, p.b.u.h, said, "Forbid them." So again he went and came back for the third time and said, "O Allah's Apostle, by Allah, they did not listen to us at all." Aisha added, "Allah's Apostle ordered him to go and put dust in their mouths." I said, to that man, "May Allah stick your nose in the dust, i.e. humiliate you." You could neither persuade the women to fulfill the order of Allah's Apostle, nor did you relieve Allah's Apostle from fatigue. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 387. Narrated by Anas, when the reciters of Quran were martyred, Allah's Apostle recited Qunut for 1 month and I never saw him, i.e. Allah's Apostle, so sad as he was on that day. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 388. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, one of the sons of Abu Talha became sick and died, and Abu Talha at that time was not at home. When his wife saw that he was dead, she prepared him, washed and shrouded him, and placed him somewhere in the house. When Abu Talha came, he asked, "How is the boy?" She said, "The child is quiet and I hope he is in peace." Abu Talha thought that she had spoken the truth. Abu Talha passed the night and in the morning took a bath, and when he intended to go out, she told him that his son had died. Abu Talha offered the morning prayer with the Prophet and informed the Prophet of what happened to them. Allah's apostle said, "May Allah bless you concerning your night." That is, may Allah bless you with good offspring. Sufyan said, one of the ангիր said, they, i.e. Abu Talha and his wife, had 9 sons and all of them became reciters of the Quran, by heart. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 389. Narrated by Anas, the Prophet said, "The real patience is at the first stroke of a calamity." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 390. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, we went with Allah's apostle, p.b.u.h, to the blacksmith Abu Sa'if, and he was the husband of the wet nurse of Ibrahim, the son of the Prophet. Allah's apostle took Ibrahim and kissed him and smelled him, and later we entered Abu Sa'if's house, and at that time Ibrahim was in his last breaths, and the eyes of Allah's apostle, p.b.u.h, started shedding tears. Abdurrahman bin Auf said, "O Allah's apostle, even you are weeping." He said, "O Ibn Auf, this is mercy." Then he wept more and said, "The eyes are shedding tears and the heart is grieved, and we will not say except what pleases our Lord, O Ibrahim. Indeed we are grieved by your separation." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 391. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, Sa'd bin Ubaydah became sick, and the Prophet along with Abdurrahman bin Auf, Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas and Abdullah bin Mas'ud visited him to inquire about his health. When he came to him, he found him surrounded by his household, and he asked, "Has he died?" They said, "No, O Allah's apostle." The Prophet wept, and when the people saw the weeping of Allah's apostle, p.b.u.h, they all wept. He said, "Will you listen? Allah does not punish for shedding tears, nor for the grief of the heart, but he punishes or bestows his mercy because of this." He pointed to his tongue and added, "The deceased is punished for the wailing of his relatives over him." Umar used to beat with a stick and throw stones and put dust over the faces of those who used to wail over the dead. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 392. Narrated by Aisha, when the news of the martyrdom of Zayd bin Haritha, Ja'far, and Abdullah bin Rawaha came, the Prophet sat down looking sad, and I was looking through the chink of the door. A man came and said, "O Allah's apostle, the women of Ja'far," and then he mentioned their crying. The Prophet, p.b.u.h, ordered him to stop them from crying. The man went and came back and said, "I tried to stop them but they disobeyed." The Prophet, p.b.u.h, ordered him for the second time to forbid them. He went again and came back and said, "They did not listen to me, or us." The sub-narrator Muhammad bin Hashab is in doubt as to which is right. Aisha added, "The Prophet said, 'Put dust in their mouths.' I said, to that man, 'May Allah stick your nose in the dust, i.e. humiliate you.' By Allah, you could not stop the women from crying, to fulfill the order. Besides, you did not relieve Allah's apostle from fatigue." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 393. Narrated by Atiyah, at the time of giving the pledge of allegiance to the Prophet, one of the conditions was that we would not wail, but it was not fulfilled except by 5 women, and they are Sulaim, al-Allah, the daughter of Abi Sabra, the wife of Mu'ad, and 2 other women, or the daughter of Abi Sabra and the wife of Mu'ad and another woman. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 394. Narrated by Amir bin Rabi'a, the Prophet said, whenever you see a funeral procession, stand up till the procession goes ahead of you. Al-Humaydi added, till the coffin leaves you behind or is put down. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 394. Narrated by Amir bin Rabi'a, the Prophet said, whenever you see a funeral procession, stand up till the procession goes ahead of you. Al-Humaydi added, till the coffin leaves you behind or is put down. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 395. Narrated by Amir bin Rabi'a, the Prophet said, if any one of you see a funeral procession and he is not going along with it, then he should stand and remain standing till he gets behind it, or it leaves him behind, or the coffin is put down before it goes ahead of him. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 396. Narrated by Said al-Makbari, that his father said, while we were accompanying a funeral procession, Abu Hurairah got hold of the hand of Marwan and they sat down before the coffin was put down. Then Abu Said came and took hold of Marwan's hand and said, get up. By Allah, no doubt this, i.e. Abu Hurairah, knows that the Prophet forbade us to do that. Abu Hurairah said, he, Abu said, has spoken the truth. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 397. Narrated by Abu Said al-Khudri, the Prophet said, when you see a funeral procession, you should stand up, and whoever accompanies it should not sit till the coffin is put down. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 398. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, a funeral procession passed in front of us and the Prophet stood up and we too stood up. We said, O Allah's Apostle, this is the funeral procession of a Jew. He said, whenever you see a funeral procession, you should stand up. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 399. Narrated by Abdurrahman bin Abi Layla, Sal bin Hunayf and Qais bin Sad were sitting in the city of Al-Qadisiyah. A funeral procession passed in front of them and they stood up. They were told that funeral procession was of one of the inhabitants of the land, i.e. of a non-believer, under the protection of Muslims. They said, a funeral procession passed in front of the Prophet and he stood up. When he was told that it was the coffin of a Jew, he said, is it not a living being, soul? Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 400. Narrated by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, Allah's Apostle said, when the funeral is ready and the men carry it on their shoulders, if the deceased was righteous it will say, present me, hurriedly, and if he was not righteous, it will say, woe to it, me. Where are they taking it, me? Its voice is heard by everything except man, and if he heard it he would fall unconscious. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 401. Narrated by Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, hurry up with the dead body, for if it was righteous, you are forwarding it to welfare, and if it was otherwise, then you are putting off an evil thing down your necks. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 402. Narrated by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, the Prophet said, when a funeral is ready and the men carry the deceased on their necks, shoulders, if it was pious then it will say, present me quickly, and if it was not pious, then it will say, woe to it, me, where are they taking it, me? And its voice is heard by everything except mankind, and if he heard it he would fall unconscious. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 403. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, Allah's apostle offered the funeral prayer for an-Najashi and I was in the second or third row. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 404. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet, p.b.u.h, informed his companions about the death of an-Najashi and then he went ahead, to lead the prayer, and the people lined up behind him in rows and he said 4 takbir. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 405. Narrated by Ash-Shaybani, Ash-Shabai said, I was informed by a man who had seen the Prophet going to a grave that was separate from the other graves and he aligned the people in rows and said 4 takbir. I said, O Abu Amr, who narrated that to you? He said, Ibn Abbas. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 406. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, the Prophet said, Today a pious man from Ethiopia, i.e. an-Najashi, has expired, come on to offer the funeral prayer. Jabir said we lined up in rows. And after that the Prophet led the prayer and we were in rows. Jabir added, I was in the second row. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 407. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, Allah's apostle passed by a grave of a deceased who had been buried at night. He said, When was this deceased buried? The people said, Yesterday. He said, Why did you not inform me? They said, We buried him when it was dark and so we disliked to wake you up. He stood up and we lined up behind him. Ibn Abbas said I was one of them, and the Prophet offered the funeral prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 408. Narrated by Ash-Shaybani, Ash-Shabai said, Somebody who passed along with your Prophet, p.b.u.h, by a grave that was separate from the other graves informed me, saying, The Prophet led us, in the prayer, and we aligned behind him. We said, O Abu Amr, who told you this narration? He replied, Ibn Abbas. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 409. Narrated by Nafi, Ibn Umar was told that Abu Huraira said, Whoever accompanies the funeral procession will have a reward equal to 1 qirat. Ibn Umar said, Abu Huraira talks of a too enormous reward. Aisha attested Abu Huraira's narration and said, I heard Allah's apostle saying like that. Ibn Umar said, We have lost numerous qirats. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 410. Narrated by Abu Huraira, that Allah's apostle, p.b.u.h, said, Whoever attends the funeral procession till he offers the funeral prayer for it, will get a reward equal to 1 qirat, and whoever accompanies it till burial, will get a reward equal to 2 qirats. It was asked, What are 2 qirats? He replied, Like 2 huge mountains. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 411. Narrated by Amir, Ibn Abbas, who was at that time a boy, said, Allah's apostle came to a grave and the people said, He or she was buried yesterday. Ibn Abbas added, We aligned behind the Prophet and he led the funeral prayer of the deceased. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 412. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's apostle informed about the news of the death of an-Najash, king of Ethiopia, on the day he expired. He said, Ask Allah's forgiveness for your brother. Narrated Abu Huraira, the Prophet made them align in rows at the musalla and said 4 takbir. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 413. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, the Jew brought to the Prophet a man and a woman from amongst them who have committed adultery, illegal sexual intercourse. He ordered both of them to be stoned to death, near the place of offering the funeral prayers beside the mosque. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 414. Narrated by Urwa, Aisha said, the Prophet in his fatal illness said, Allah curse the Jews and the Christians because they took the graves of their prophets as places for praying. Aisha added, had it not been for that the grave of the Prophet, p.b.u.h, would have been made prominent, but I am afraid it might be taken as a place for praying. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 415. Narrated by Samura bin Jundab, I offered the funeral prayer behind the Prophet for a woman who had died during childbirth, and he stood up by the middle of the coffin. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 416. Narrated by Samura bin Jundab, I offered the funeral prayer behind the Prophet for a woman who had died during childbirth, and he stood up by the middle of the coffin. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 417. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's Apostle informed about the news of the death of a Najash on the day he died. He went out with us to the Musalla and we aligned in rows, and he said 4 takbars for a Najashi's funeral prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 418. Narrated by Jabir, the Prophet offered the funeral prayer of Ashama and Najash and said 4 takbir. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 419. Narrated by Talha bin Abdullah bin Auf, I offered the funeral prayer behind Ibn Abbas, and he recited Al-Fatiha and said, you should know that it, i.e. recitation of Al-Fatiha, is the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 420. Narrated by Sulayman Ash-Shaybani, I heard Ash-Shabai saying, I was told by a man who had passed with the Prophet, p.b.u.h, by a grave that was separate from the other graves, that he, the Prophet, led them in the prayer and they prayed behind him. I said, O Abu Amr, who narrated that to you? He replied, Ibn Abbas. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 421. Narrated by Abu Huraira, a black person, a male or a female, used to clean the mosque and then died. The Prophet, p.b.u.h, did not know about it. One day the Prophet remembered him and said, what happened to that person? The people replied, O Allah's Apostle, he died. He said, why did you not inform me? They said, his story was so and so, i.e. regarded him as insignificant. He said, show me his grave. He then went to his grave and offered the funeral prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 422. Narrated by Anas, the Prophet said, when a human being is laid in his grave and his companions return and he even hears their footsteps, 2 angels come to him and make him sit and ask him, what did you use to say about this man, Muhammad? He will say, I testify that he is Allah's slave and his apostle. Then it will be said to him, look at your place in the hellfire. Allah has given you a place in paradise instead of it. The Prophet added, the dead person will see both his places. But a non-believer or a hypocrite will say to the angels, I do not know, but I used to say what the people used to say. It will be said to him, neither did you know nor did you take the guidance, by reciting the Quran. Then he will be hit with an iron hammer between his 2 ears, and he will cry, and that cry will be heard by whatever approaches him except human beings and jinns. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 423. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the angel of death was sent to Moses, and when he went to him, Moses slapped him severely, spoiling one of his eyes. The angel went back to his Lord, and said, "You sent me to a slave who does not want to die." Allah restored his eye and said, "Go back and tell him, i.e. Moses, to place his hand over the back of an ox, for he will be allowed to live for a number of years equal to the number of hairs coming under his hand." So the angel came to him and told him the same. Then Moses asked, "O my Lord, what will be then?" He said, "Death will be then." He said, "Let it be, now." He asked Allah that he bring him near the sacred land at a distance of a stone's throw. Allah's apostle, p.b.u.h, said, "Were I there I would show you the grave of Moses by the way near the red sand hill." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 424. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, the Prophet, p.b.u.h, offered the funeral prayer of a man one night after he was buried. He and his companions stood up for the prayer. He had asked them about him before standing, saying, "Who is this?" They said, "He is so and was buried last night." So all of them offered the funeral prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 425. Narrated by Aisha, when the Prophet became ill, some of his wives talked about a church which they had seen in Ethiopia, and it was called Maria. Salma and Habiba had been to Ethiopia, and both of them narrated the church's, beauty and the pictures it contained. The Prophet raised his head and said, "Those are the people who, whenever a pious man dies amongst them, make a place of worship at his grave and then they make those pictures in it. Those are the worst creatures in the sight of Allah." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 426. Narrated by Anas, we were in the funeral procession of the daughter of Allah's apostle, and Allah's apostle was sitting near the grave, and I saw his eyes full of tears. He said, "Is there anyone amongst you who did not have sexual relations with his wife last night?" Abu Talha replied in the affirmative. And so Allah's apostle told him to get down in her grave, and he got down in her grave and buried her. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 427. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, the Prophet collected every 2 martyrs of Uhud in one piece of cloth, then he would ask, which of them knew more of the Quran. When one of them was pointed out for him, he would put that one first in the grave and say, "I will be a witness on these on the day of resurrection." He ordered them to be buried with their blood on their bodies, and they were neither washed nor was a funeral prayer offered for them. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 428. Narrated by Uqba bin Amir, one day the Prophet went out and offered the funeral prayers of the martyrs of Uhud, and then went up the pulpit and said, "I will pave the way for you as your predecessor and will be a witness on you. By Allah, I see my fount, Kothar, just now, and I have been given the keys of all the treasures of the earth, or the keys of the earth. By Allah, I am not afraid that you will worship others along with Allah after my death, but I am afraid that you will fight with one another for the worldly things." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 429. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, the Prophet buried every 2 martyrs in Uhud in one grave. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 430. Narrated by Jabir, the Prophet said, "Bury them, i.e. martyrs, with their blood." That was, on the day of the Battle of Uhud. He did not get them washed. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 431. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, Allah's apostle shrouded every 2 martyrs of Uhud in one piece of cloth, and then he would ask, which of them knew more Quran. When one of them was pointed out, he would put him first in the grave. He said, I am a witness on these. Then he ordered them to be buried with blood on their bodies. Neither did he offer their funeral prayer, nor did he get them washed. Jabir bin Abdullah added, Allah's apostle used to ask about the martyrs of Uhud as to which of them knew more of the Quran. And when one of them was pointed out as having more of it, he would put him first in the grave and then his companions. Jabir added, my father and my uncle were shrouded in one sheet. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 432. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, the Prophet said, Allah has made Mecca a sanctuary, sacred place, and it was a sanctuary before me and will be so after me. It was made legal for me, to fight in it, for a few hours of the day. None is allowed to uproot its thorny shrubs, or to cut its trees, or to chase its game, or to pick up its fallen things, except by a person who announces it publicly. On that Al-Abbas said, to the Prophet, except al-ангիր for our goldsmiths and for our graves. And so the Prophet added, except al-ангիր. And Abu Hurairah narrated that the Prophet said, except al-ангիր for our graves and houses. And Ibn Abbas said, for their goldsmiths and houses. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 433. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, Allah's apostle came to Abdullah bin Ubay, a hypocrite, after his death, and he has been laid in his pit, grave. He ordered, that he be taken out of the grave, and he was taken out. Then he placed him on his knees and threw some of his saliva on him and clothed him in his, the Prophet's, own shirt. Allah knows better, why he did so. Abdullah bin Ubay had given his shirt to Al-Abbas to wear. Abu Harun said, Allah's apostle at that time had 2 shirts, and the son of Abdullah bin Ubay said to him, O Allah's apostle, clothe my father in your shirt which has been in contact with your skin. Sufyan added, thus people think that the Prophet clothed Abdullah bin Tubal in his shirt in lieu of what he, Abdullah, had done, for Al-Abbas, the Prophet's uncle. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 434. Narrated by Jabir, when the time of the Battle of Uhud approached, my father called me at night and said, I think that I will be the first amongst the companions of the Prophet to be martyred. I do not leave anyone after me dearer to me than you, except Allah's apostle's soul, and I owe some debt, and you should repay it and treat your sisters favorably, nicely and politely. So in the morning he was the first to be martyred and was buried along with another, martyr. I did not like to leave him with the other, martyr, so I took him out of the grave after 6 months of his burial, and he was in the same condition as he was on the day of burial, except a slight change near his ear. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 435. Narrated by Jabir, a man was buried along with my father, and I did not like it till I took him, i.e. my father, out and buried him in a separate grave. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 436. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, the Prophet collected every 2 martyrs of Uhud, in one grave, and then he would ask, which of them knew the Quran more. And if one of them was pointed out for him as having more knowledge, he would put him first in the lot. The Prophet said, I will be a witness on these on the day of resurrection. Then he ordered them to be buried with their blood on their bodies, and he did not have them washed. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 437. Narrated by Ibn Umar, Umar set out along with the Prophet, p.b.u.h, with a group of people to Ibn Sayyid till they saw him playing with the boys near the hillocks of Bani Mogila. Ibn Sayyid at that time was nearing his puberty and did not notice us, until the Prophet stroked him with his hand and said to him, "Do you testify that I am Allah's apostle?" Ibn Sayyid looked at him and said, "I testify that you are the messenger of illiterates." Then Ibn Sayyid asked the Prophet, P.B.U.H, "Do you testify that I am Allah's apostle?" The Prophet, P.B.U.H, refuted it and said, "I believe in Allah and His apostles." Then he said, to Ibn Sayyid, "What do you think?" Ibn Sayyid answered, "True people and liars visit me." The Prophet said, "You have been confused as to this matter." Then the Prophet said to him, "I have kept something, in my mind, for you, can you tell me that?" Ibn Sayyid said, "It is al-duk, the smoke. 2. The Prophet said, "Let you be in ignominy. You cannot cross your limits." On that Umar said, "O Allah's apostle, allow me to chop his head off." The Prophet, P.B.U.H, said, "If he is he, i.e. Dajjal, then you cannot overpower him, and if he is not, then there is no use of murdering him." Ibn Umar added later on, Allah's apostle, P.B.U.H, once again went along with Ubay bin Ka'b to the date palm trees, garden, where Ibn Sayyid was staying. The Prophet, P.B.U.H, wanted to hear something from Ibn Sayyid before Ibn Sayyid could see him, and the Prophet, P.B.U.H, saw him lying covered with a sheet, and from where his murmurs were heard. Ibn Sayyid's mother saw Allah's apostle while he was hiding himself behind the trunks of the date palm trees. She addressed Ibn Sayyid, "O Saf." And this was the name of Ibn Sayyid, "Here is Muhammad." And with that Ibn Sayyid got up. The Prophet said, had this woman left him, had she not disturbed him, then Ibn Sayyid would have revealed the reality of his case. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 438. Narrated by Anas, a young Jewish boy used to serve the Prophet and he became sick. So the Prophet went to visit him. He sat near his head and asked him to embrace Islam. The boy looked at his father, who was sitting there. The latter told him to obey Abu al-Qasim, and the boy embraced Islam. The Prophet came out saying, "Praises be to Allah who saved the boy from the hellfire." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 439. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, "My mother and I were among the weak and oppressed. I from among the children, and my mother from among the women." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 440. Narrated by Ibn Shihab, "The funeral prayer should be offered for every child even if he were the son of a prostitute, as he was born with the true faith of Islam, i.e. to worship none but Allah alone. If his parents are Muslims, particularly the father, even if his mother were a non-Muslim, and if he after the delivery cries, even once, before his death, i.e. born alive, then the funeral prayer must be offered. And if the child does not cry after his delivery, i.e. born dead, then his funeral prayer should not be offered, and he will be considered as a miscarriage." Abu Hurairah narrated that the Prophet said, "Every child is born with a true faith, i.e. to worship none but Allah alone, but his parents convert him to Judaism or to Christianity or to Magianism, as an animal delivers a perfect baby animal. Do you find it mutilated?" Then Abu Hurairah recited the holy verses, "The pure Allah's Islamic nature, true faith, i.e. to worship none but Allah alone, with which he has created human beings." 30.30. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 441. Narrated by Abu Hurairah, Allah's Apostle said, "Every child is born with a true faith of Islam, i.e. to worship none but Allah alone, but his parents convert him to Judaism, Christianity, or Paganism, as an animal delivers a perfect baby animal. Do you find it mutilated?" Then Abu Hurairah recited the holy verses, the pure Allah's Islamic nature, true faith of Islam, i.e. worshipping none but Allah, with which he has created human beings. No change let there be in the religion of Allah, i.e. joining none in worship with Allah. That is the straight religion, Islam, but most of men know, not. 30.30 Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 442. Narrated by Said bin al-Musayyib, from his father, when the time of the death of Abu Talib approached, Allah's Apostle went to him and found Abu Yal bin Hisham and Abdullah bin Abi Umayyah bin al-Mughira by his side. Allah's Apostle said to Abu Talib, "O uncle, say, none has the right to be worshipped but Allah, a sentence with which I shall be a witness, i.e. argue, for you before Allah." Abu Yal and Abdullah bin Abi Umayyah said, "O Abu Talib, are you going to denounce the religion of Abdul Muttalib?" Allah's Apostle kept on inviting Abu Talib to say it, i.e. none has the right to be worshipped but Allah, while they, Abu Yal and Abdullah, kept on repeating their statement till Abu Talib said as his last statement that he was on the religion of Abdul Muttalib and refused to say, "None has the right to be worshipped but Allah." Then Allah's Apostle said, "I will keep on asking Allah's forgiveness for you unless I am forbidden, by Allah, to do so." So Allah revealed, the verse, concerning him, i.e. it is not fitting for the Prophet and those who believe that they should invoke Allah for forgiveness for pagans even though they be of kin, after it has become clear to them that they are companions of the fire. 9.113 Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 443. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, the Prophet once passed by two graves, and those two persons, in the graves, were being tortured. He said, "They are being tortured not for a great thing, to avoid." One of them never saved himself from being soiled with his urine, while the other was going about with calumnies, to make enmity between friends. He then took a green leaf of a date palm tree, split it into two pieces and fixed one on each grave. The people said, "O Allah's Apostle, why have you done so?" He replied, "I hope that their punishment may be lessened till they, the leaf, become dry." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 444. Narrated by Ali, we were accompanying a funeral procession in Baqi-i Gharqad. The Prophet came to us and we sat around him. He had a small stick in his hand, then he bent his head and started scraping the ground with it. He then said, "There is none among you, and not a created soul, but has place either in paradise or in hell assigned for him, and it is also determined for him whether he will be among the blessed or wretched." A man said, "O Allah's Apostle, should we not depend on what has been written for us and leave the deeds, as whoever amongst us is blessed will do the deeds of a blessed person, and whoever amongst us will be wretched, will do the deeds of a wretched person?" The Prophet said, "The good deeds are made easy for the blessed, and bad deeds are made easy for the wretched." Then he recited the verses, "As for him who gives, in charity, and is Allah-fearing and believes in the best reward from Allah." 92.5-6 Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 445. Narrated by Thabit bin ad-Dahhak, the Prophet, p.b.u.h, said, "Whoever intentionally swears falsely by a religion other than Islam, then he is what he has said, e.g. if he says, 'If such thing is not true then I am a Jew,' he is really a Jew. And whoever commits suicide with piece of iron will be punished with the same piece of iron in the hell fire. Narrated Jundab the Prophet said, a man was inflicted with wounds and he committed suicide, and so Allah said, my slave has caused death on himself hurriedly, so I forbid paradise for him. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 446. Narrated by Abu Hurairah the Prophet said, he who commits suicide by throttling shall keep on throttling himself in the hell fire, forever, and he who commits suicide by stabbing himself shall keep on stabbing himself in the hell fire. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 447. Narrated by Umar bin al-Khattab, when Abdullah bin Ubay bin Salul died, Allah's apostle, p.b.u.h, was called upon to offer his funeral prayer. When Allah's apostle stood up to offer the prayer, I got up quickly and said, O Allah's apostle, are you going to pray for Ibn Ubay? And he said so and so on such and such occasions, and started mentioning all that he had said. Allah's apostle smiled and said, O Umar, go away from me. When I talked too much, he said, I have been given the choice and so I have chosen, to offer the prayer. Had I known that he would be forgiven by asking for Allah's forgiveness for more than 70 times, surely I would have done so. Umar added, Allah's apostle offered his funeral prayer and returned, and after a short while the 2 verses of Surat Bara were revealed, i.e. and never, O Muhammad, pray for any of them who dies. To the end of the verse, Rebellion, 9.84. Umar added, later I astonished at my daring before Allah's apostle on that day. And Allah and his apostle know better. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 448. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, a funeral procession passed and the people praised the deceased. The Prophet said, it has been affirmed to him. Then another funeral procession passed and the people spoke badly of the deceased. The Prophet said, it has been affirmed to him. Umar bin al-Khattab asked, Allah's apostle, p.b.u.h, what has been affirmed? He replied, you praised this, so paradise has been affirmed to him, and you spoke badly of this, so hell has been affirmed to him. You people are Allah's witnesses on earth. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 449. Narrated by Abu al-Aswad, I came to Medina when an epidemic had broken out. While I was sitting with Umar bin al-Khattab, a funeral procession passed by and the people praised the deceased. Umar said, it has been affirmed to him. And another funeral procession passed by and the people praised the deceased. Umar said, it has been affirmed to him. A third funeral procession passed by and the people spoke badly of the deceased. He said, it has been affirmed to him. I, Abu al-Aswad, asked, O chief of the believers, what has been affirmed? He replied, I said the same as the Prophet had said, that is, if 4 persons testify the piety of a Muslim, Allah will grant him paradise. We asked, if 3 persons testify his piety? He, the Prophet, replied, even 3. Then we asked, if 2? He replied, even 2. We did not ask him regarding 1 witness. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 450. Narrated by Al-Bara bin Azibah, the Prophet, p.b.u.h, said, when a faithful believer is made to sit in his grave, then, the angels, come to him and he testifies that none has the right to be worshipped but Allah and Muhammad is Allah's apostle. And that corresponds to Allah's statement, Allah will keep firm those who believe with the word that stands firm. 14.27. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 451. Narrated by Shubi'a, same as above and added, Allah will keep firm those who believe. 14.27, was revealed concerning the punishment of the grave. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 452. Narrated by Ibn Umar, the Prophet looked at the people of the well in which the bodies of the pagans killed in the battle of Badr were thrown, and said, "Have you found true what your Lord promised you?" Somebody said to him, "You are addressing dead people." He replied, "You do not hear better than they, but they cannot reply." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 453. Narrated by Aisha, the Prophet said, "They now realize that what I used to tell them was the truth." And Allah said, "Verily, you cannot make the dead to hear, i.e. benefit them, and similarly the disbelievers, nor can you make the deaf hear." 27.80. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 454. Narrated by Masruq, Aisha said that a Jewess came to her and mentioned the punishment in the grave, saying to her, "May Allah protect you from the punishment of the grave." Aisha then asked Allah's Apostle about the punishment of the grave. He said, "Yes, there is punishment in the grave." Aisha added, "After that I never saw Allah's Apostle but seeking refuge with Allah from the punishment in the grave in every prayer he prayed." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 455. Narrated by Asma bint Abi Bakra, Allah's Apostle once stood up delivering a sermon and mentioned the trial which people will face in the grave. When he mentioned that, the Muslims started shouting loudly. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 456. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, Allah's Apostle said, "When Allah's slave is put in his grave and his companions return and he even hears their footsteps, two angels come to him and make him sit and ask, 'What did you use to say about this man, i.e. Muhammad?' The faithful believer will say, 'I testify that he is Allah's slave and his apostle.' Then they will say to him, 'Look at your place in the hellfire, Allah has given you a place in paradise instead of it.' So he will see both his places." Qatada said, "We were informed that his grave would be made spacious." Then Qatada went back to the narration of Anas who said, "Whereas a hypocrite or a non-believer will be asked, 'What did you use to say about this man?' He will reply, 'I do not know, but I used to say what the people used to say.' So they will say to him, 'Neither did you know nor did you take the guidance, by reciting the Quran. Then he will be hit with iron hammers once, that he will send such a cry as everything near to him will hear, except jinns and human beings." See Hadith number 422. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 457. Narrated by Abi Ayyub, once the Prophet went out after sunset and heard a dreadful voice, and said, "The Jews are being punished in their graves." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 458. Narrated by Musa bin Uqba, from the daughter of Khalid bin Said bin Laci, who said that she had heard the Prophet seeking refuge with Allah from the punishment in the grave. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 458. Narrated by Musa bin Uqba, from the daughter of Khalid bin Said bin Laci, who said that she had heard the Prophet seeking refuge with Allah from the punishment in the grave. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 459. Narrated by Abu Hurairah, Allah's Apostle used to invoke, Allah Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min adhabi al-kabr, wa min adhabi nar, wa min fitnati al-mahaya wa al-mamat, wa min fitnati al-masi ad-dajjal. O Allah, I seek refuge with you from the punishment in the grave and from the punishment in the hellfire and from the afflictions of life and death, and the afflictions of al-masi ad-dajjal. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 460. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, the Prophet once passed by two graves and said, the deceased persons in those graves, are being tortured not for a great thing to avoid. And then added, yes, they are being punished for a big sin, for one of them used to go about with calumnies while the other never saved himself from being soiled with his urine. Ibn Abbas added, then he took a green leaf of a date palm, and split it into two pieces and fixed one piece on each grave and said, may their punishment be abated till these, two pieces, get dry. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 461. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, Allah's Apostle said, when any one of you dies, he is shown his place both in the morning and in the evening. If he is one of the people of paradise, he is shown his place in it, and if he is from the people of the hellfire, he is shown his place therein. Then it is said to him, this is your place till Allah resurrect you on the day of resurrection. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 462. Narrated by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, Allah's Apostle said, when the funeral is ready, for its burial, and the people lift it on their shoulders, then if the deceased is a righteous person he says, take me ahead, and if he is not a righteous one then he says, woe to it, me. Where are you taking it, me? And his voice is audible to everything except human beings, and if they heard it they would fall down unconscious. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 463. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, Allah's Apostle, p.b.u.h, said, any Muslim whose 3 children died before the age of puberty will be granted paradise by Allah because of His mercy to them. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 464. Narrated by Al-Bara, when Ibrahim, the son of Prophet, expired, Allah's Apostle said, there is a wet nurse for him in paradise. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 465. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, Allah's Apostle, p.b.u.h, was asked about the children of mushrikeen, pagans. The Prophet replied, since Allah created them, He knows what sort of deeds they would have done. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 466. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet was asked about the offspring of pagans, mushrikeen, so he said, Allah knows what sort of deeds they would have done. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 467. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, every child is born with the true faith of Islam, i.e. to worship none but Allah alone, and his parents convert him to Judaism or Christianity or Magianism, as an animal delivers a perfect baby animal. Do you find it mutilated? Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 468. Narrated by Samura bin Jundab, whenever the Prophet finished the morning prayer, he would face us and ask, who amongst you had a dream last night? So if anyone had seen a dream he would narrate it. The Prophet would say, MashaAllah, an Arabic maxim meaning literally, what Allah wished, and it indicates a good omen. One day, he asked us whether any one of us had seen a dream. We replied in the negative. The Prophet said, but I had seen, a dream, last night that two men came to me, caught hold of my hands, and took me to the sacred land, Jerusalem. There, I saw a person sitting and another standing with an iron hook in his hand, pushing it inside the mouth of the former till it reached the jawbone, and then tore off one side of his cheek, and then did the same with the other side. In the meantime the first side of his cheek became normal again, and then he repeated the same operation again. I said, "What is this?" They told me to proceed on, and we went on till we came to a man lying flat on his back, and another man standing at his head carrying a stone or a piece of rock, and crushing the head of the lying man, with that stone. Whenever he struck him, the stone rolled away. The man went to pick it up, and by the time he returned to him, the crushed head had returned to its normal state, and the man came back and struck him again, and so on. I said, "Who is this?" They told me to proceed on, so we proceeded on and passed by a hole like an oven, with a narrow top and wide bottom, and the fire was kindling underneath that hole. Whenever the fire flame went up, the people were lifted up to such an extent that they about to get out of it, and whenever the fire got quieter, the people went down into it, and there were naked men and women in it. I said, "Who is this?" They told me to proceed on. So we proceeded on till we reached a river of blood, and a man was in it, and another man was standing at its bank with stones in front of him, facing the man standing in the river. Whenever the man in the river wanted to come out, the other one threw a stone in his mouth and caused him to retreat to his original position, and so whenever he wanted to come out, the other would throw a stone in his mouth, and he would retreat to his original position. I asked, "What is this?" They told me to proceed on, and we did so till we reached a well-flourished green garden having a huge tree, and near its root was sitting an old man with some children. I saw another man near the tree with fire in front of him, and he was kindling it up. Then they, i.e. my two companions, made me climb up the tree and made me enter a house, better than which I have ever seen. In it were some old men and young men, women, and children. Then they took me out of this house and made me climb up the tree and made me enter another house that was better and superior to the first, containing old and young people. I said to them, i.e. my two companions, "You have made me ramble all the night. Tell me all about that I have seen." They said, "Yes. As for the one whose cheek you saw being torn away, he was a liar, and he used to tell lies, and the people would report those lies on his authority till they spread all over the world. So, he will be punished like that till the day of resurrection. The one whose head you saw being crushed is the one whom Allah had given the knowledge of Quran, i.e. knowing it by heart, but he used to sleep at night, i.e. he did not recite it then, and did not use to act upon it, i.e. upon its orders etc., by day, and so this punishment will go on till the day of resurrection. And those you saw in the hole, like oven, were adulterers, those men and women who commit illegal sexual intercourse. And those you saw in the river of blood were those dealing in riba, usury. And the old man who was sitting at the base of the tree was Abraham, and the little children around him were the offspring of the people. And the one who was kindling the fire was Malik, the gatekeeper of the hell fire. And the first house in which you have gone was the house of the common believers, and the second house was of the martyrs. I am Gabriel, and this is Michael. Raise your head. I raised my head and saw a thing like a cloud over me. They said, "That is your place." I said, "Let me enter my place." They said, "You still have some life which you have not yet completed, and when you complete that remaining portion of your life, you will then enter your place." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 469. Narrated by Hisham's father, Aisha said, "I went to Abu Bakr during his fatal illness, and he asked me, in how many garments was the Prophet shrouded? She replied, in 3 sahulia pieces of white cloth of cotton, and there was neither a shirt nor a turban among them. Abu Bakr further asked her, on which day did the Prophet die? She replied, he died on Monday. He asked, what is today? She replied, today is Monday. He added, I hope I shall die sometime between this morning and tonight. Then he looked at a garment that he was wearing during his illness, and it had some stains of saffron. Then he said, wash this garment of mine and add 2 more garments and shroud me in them. I said, this is worn out. He said, a living person has more right to wear new clothes than a dead one, the shroud is only for the body's pus. He did not die till it was the night of Tuesday and was buried before the morning. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 470. Narrated by Aisha, a man said to the Prophet, P.B.U.H, my mother died suddenly and I thought that if she had lived she would have given alms. So, if I give alms now on her behalf, will she get the reward? The Prophet replied in the affirmative. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 471. Narrated by Aisha, during his sickness, Allah's apostle was asking repeatedly, where am I today? Where will I be tomorrow? And I was waiting for the day of my turn, impatiently. Then, when my turn came, Allah took his soul away, in my lap, between my chest and arms, and he was buried in my house. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 472. Narrated by Aisha, Allah's apostle in his fatal illness said, Allah cursed the Jews and the Christians, for they built the places of worship at the graves of their prophets. And if that had not been the case, then the prophet's grave would have been made prominent before the people. So, the prophet was afraid, or the people were afraid that his grave might be taken as a place for worship. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 473. Narrated by Abu Bakr bin Ayyasha, Sufyan at-Tamr told me that he had seen the grave of the Prophet elevated and convex. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 474. Narrated by Urwa, when the wall fell on them, i.e. graves, during the caliphate of Al-Walid bin Abdul Malik, the people started repairing it, and a foot appeared to them. The people got scared and thought that it was the foot of the Prophet. No one could be found who could tell them about it till I, Urwa, said to them, by Allah, this is not the foot of the Prophet but it is the foot of Umar. Aisha narrated that she made a will to Abdullah bin Zubair, do not bury me with them, the Prophet and his 2 companions, but bury me with my companions, wives of the Prophet, P.B.U.H, in al-Baqi, as I would not like to be looked upon as better than I really am, by being buried near the Prophet. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 475. Narrated by Amr bin Ma'iman al-Audi, I saw Umar bin al-Khattab, when he was stabbed, saying, O Abdullah bin Umar, go to the mother of the believers Aisha and say, Umar bin al-Khattab sends his greetings to you, and request her to allow me to be buried with my companions. So, Ibn Umar conveyed the message to Aisha. She said, I had the idea of having this place for myself, but today I prefer him, Umar, to myself, and allow him to be buried there. When Abdullah bin Umar returned, Umar asked him, what news do you have? He replied, O chief of the believers, she has allowed you to be buried there. On that Umar said, nothing was more important to me than to be buried in that sacred place. So, when I expire, carry me there and pay my greetings to her, Aisha, and say, Umar bin al-Khattab asks permission, and if she gives permission, then bury me there, and if she does not, then take me to the graveyard of the Muslims. I do not think any person has more right for the caliphate than those with whom Allah's apostle, p.b.u.h, was always pleased till his death. And whoever is chosen by the people after me will be the caliph, and you people must listen to him and obey him. And then he mentioned the name of Uthman, Ali, Talha, Az Zubair, Abdurrahman bin Auf and Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas. By this time a young man from Ангիր came and said, O chief of the believers, be happy with Allah's glad tidings. The grade which you have in Islam is known to you, then you became the caliph and you ruled with justice and then you have been awarded martyrdom after all this. Umar replied, O son of my brother, would that all that privileges will counterbalance my shortcomings, so that I neither lose nor gain anything. I recommend my successor to be good to the early emigrants and realize their rights and to protect their honor and sacred things. And I also recommend him to be good to the Ангիր who before them had homes in Medina, and had adopted the faith. He should accept the good of the righteous among them and should excuse their wrongdoers. I recommend him to abide by the rules and regulations concerning the dhimmis, protectees, of Allah and His Apostle, to fulfill their contracts completely and fight for them and not to tax, overburden, them beyond their capabilities. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 476. Narrated by Aisha, the Prophet, p.b.u.h, said, Don't abuse the dead, because they have reached the result of what they forwarded. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 477. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, Abu Lahab, may Allah curse him, once said to the Prophet, p.b.u.h, perish you all the day. Then the divine inspiration came, perish the hands of Abi Lahab. And perish he. 111.1. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 478. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, the Prophet sent Mu'adh to Yemen and said, Invite the people to testify that none has the right to be worshipped but Allah and I am Allah's apostle, and if they obey you to do so, then teach them that Allah has enjoined on them 5 prayers in every day and night, in 24 hours, and if they obey you to do so, then teach them that Allah has made it obligatory for them to pay the zakat from their property and it is to be taken from the wealthy among them and given to the poor. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 479. Narrated by Abu Ayyub, a man said to the Prophet, Tell me of such a deed as will make me enter paradise. The people said, What is the matter with him? What is the matter with him? The Prophet said, He has something to ask. What he needs greatly, the Prophet said, In order to enter paradise, you should worship Allah and do not ascribe any partners to Him, offer prayer perfectly, pay the zakat and keep good relations with your kith and kin. See Hadith number 12, Vol 8. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 480. Narrated by Abu Huraira, a Bedouin came to the Prophet and said, Tell me of such a deed as will make me enter paradise, if I do it. The Prophet, p.b.u.h, said, Worship Allah, and worship none along with Him, offer the 5 prescribed compulsory prayers perfectly, pay the compulsory zakat, and fast the month of Ramadan. The Bedouin said, By Him, in whose hands my life is, I will not do more than this. When he, the Bedouin, left, the Prophet said, Whoever likes to see a man of paradise, then he may look at this man. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 481. Narrated by Abu Zur'a, from the Prophet the same as above. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 482. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, a delegation of the tribe of Abdul Qais came to the Prophet and said, O Allah's Apostle! We are from the tribe of Rabi'a, and the infidels of the tribe of Madar stands between us and you, so we cannot come to you except during the sacred months. Please order us to do something, religious deeds, which we may carry out and also invite to it our people whom we have left behind. The Prophet said, I order you to do 4 things and forbid you 4 others. I order you, to have faith in Allah, and confess that none has the right to be worshipped but Allah, and the Prophet gestured with his hand like this, i.e. one nod, and to offer prayers perfectly and to pay the zakat, and to pay 1/5 of the booty in Allah's cause. And I forbid you to use dubba, hantam, nacheir and musafat. All these are the names of utensils used for preparing alcoholic drinks. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 23, Hadith number 483. Narrated by Abu Huraira, when Allah's Apostle died and Abu Bakr became the Caliph, some Arabs renegade, reverted to disbelief. Abu Bakr decided to declare war against them. Umar said to Abu Bakr, how can you fight with these people? Although Allah's Apostle said, I have been ordered, by Allah, to fight the people till they say, none has the right to be worshipped but Allah, and whoever said it then he will save his life and property from me except on trespassing the law, rights and conditions for which he will be punished justly, and his accounts will be with Allah. Abu Bakr said, by Allah, I will fight those who differentiate between the prayer and the zakat, as zakat is the compulsory right to be taken from the property, according to Allah's orders, by Allah. If they refuse to pay me even a shikid which they used to pay at the time of Allah's Apostle, I would fight with them for withholding it. Then Umar said, by Allah, it was nothing, but Allah opened Abu Bakr's chest towards the decision, to fight, and I came to know that his decision was right.